Hi, thank you for joining me for Bible study. We're looking in the book of Joshua, Joshua chapter 10. And I think it bears mentioning just a little history lesson here. One is from our current history. You know, the last 100 years have been kind of interesting because, the United States fought a war with Great Britain twice to gain their independence. And within the last 100 years, fought two wars, not only on the same side as the British, but in one of those wars, basically helped them survive, switching sides. And in those wars, in that process, Britain and France, at first, mortal enemies, but within the last 100 years, they became close allies. And when we were defending Britain, France was defending France, or Britain was defending France against the Germans. And who was helping us with that in the Second World War? Russia. But as soon as the Second World War was over, the socialists who were helping us defeat the socialists became our new mortal enemies, and we enlisted the help of Germany, now without those Nazis, and Japan, now without those, and made them our allies to help us in the war against Russia. And we're still kind of figuring that one out. And so you see where war makes for strange bedfellows. Well, there's an episode in the book of Joshua that is equally confounding. And that's in Joshua chapter 10. So we're going to start there, then we'll back up to Joshua chapter 9 to explain why we have the weird situation in Joshua chapter 10. But let's read Joshua chapter 10 first. Now it came to pass when Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had taken Ai and had utterly destroyed it, as he had done to Jericho and its king, so he had done to Ai and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, that they feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were mighty. Therefore Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, sent to Hoham, king of Hebron, Piram, king of Jarmuth, Japhia, king of Lachish, and Debir, king of Eglon, saying, Come up to me and help me, that we may attack Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the children of Israel. Therefore the 5 kings of the Amorites, king of Jerusalem, king of Hebron, king of Jarmuth, king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered together and went up, and they and all their armies encamped before Gibeon and made war against it. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp at Gilgal, saying, Do not forsake your servants. Come up to us quickly. Save us and help us, for all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the mountains have gathered together against us. So I'm going to pause here and just say, okay, so you may not realize, because it's a familiar city if you're familiar with your Bible, but Gibeon is full of Canaanites. And so Jerusalem, full of Canaanites. Hebron, full of Canaanites. All these cities are full of Canaanites. And so this group of kings in the south, Jerusalem, Hebron, all these others, Canaanites, they say, Gibeon, the mighty city, is no longer in our league. They're no longer playing with us. They're no longer our allies. Let's go attack them. And so why would Israel care if one group of Canaanites is attacking another group of Canaanites? Especially if it's a mighty city like Gibeon, aren't they going to be kind of hard to handle? But what makes the Gibeonites think that Joshua will help them? Well, help them they do. Why? Because of Joshua chapter 9. So now we'll flip back over here. So we have the strange situation of Israel is going to help Canaanites defend themselves against Canaanites. Why is this happening? Well, in chapter 9, we see, and it came to pass when all the kings who were on this side of the Jordan, in the hills and the lowland and the coasts of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites heard about it. They gathered together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors. And it goes on, it says, so they worked up this scheme, and they went to the camp to Joshua and said, oh, we're from a faraway city. Make peace with us. And the people of Israel are like, but we're not supposed to make peace with the people in Canaan. What if you're some of those people? And the people of Gibeon, who are Canaanites, they're not supposed to be making treaties with, said, we'll be your servants, just make peace with us. And they're like, well, Joshua says, where are you from? They said, oh, far away. You've never heard of us, I'm sure of it. Far away. And then they used their deception. They had brought old stuff, and they're like, look, we've traveled so far that our bread is now moldy, our water's used up, our clothes are worn out, our shoes are worn out. We've come from so far away. And it says, and it's important to remember this, that in chapter 9, verse 14, then the men of Israel took some of their provisions, but they did not ask counsel of the Lord. So Joshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the rulers of the congregation swore to them. And so they made a covenant with these people. Then after 3 days, they go over the hill, and what the? You guys live right here in our backyard. You are in the middle of our promised land. And the children of Israel are like, let's beat them up. Let's conquer them. And elders of Israel are like, oh, we can't. We made a promise. So what happens? Well, they learned a lesson when Achan broke the promise and said, I'm going to steal what belongs to God and keep some of it for myself. It brought a curse upon all of Israel, and they stopped winning battles. And so I think that's what's going on here is they realize we can't go back on our word because that would be breaking a promise with God that we made to the Gibeonites, that we would preserve them. Oh, but they weren't supposed to do that. They were tricked, but they didn't ask counsel of the Lord. And so our first lesson in the story is maybe we should pray before we make decisions. Always, especially binding decisions like these. Seek counsel of the Lord according to his word, asking him for direction and help in knowing these things. So now we see where the children of Israel have sinned. They made a treaty with someone they weren't supposed to. So now what? They can't go back on the treaty, though, is what the lesson we're getting here. They did make a promise, and they're supposed to be people of the people of God are supposed to be honest, trustworthy people. And so they've made this promise. And so Joshua says, why have you deceived us? Why have you deceived us? And said, we are very far from you when you dwell near us. Now, therefore, you will be cursed. Cursed in what way? You will never be freed from being slaves. You'll be woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God. And it's interesting, that's what they're going to do, is then they're going to be servants of the house of God. But they answered Joshua and said, because your servants were clearly told that the Lord your God commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land, destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Therefore, we were very much afraid for our lives because of you, and have done this thing. Now, therefore, here we are, in your hands. Do with us as it seems good and right to do to us. And so they did. And so unto this day, it says, they were woodcutters and carriers of water for the congregation and for the altar of the Lord. They became servants of the house of the Lord. So there is the connection. So now when Canaanites encircle Gibeon and say, we're going to destroy them for making peace with the Israelites. Can the Israelites sit on their hands and say, oopsie, I guess we're not going to be able to help them? No, that would be breaking their word. That would be lying in the name of the Lord. And so when the Gibeonites say, do not forsake us, you made a treaty, save us, help us. Here's what happens. Verse 7 of chapter 10. So Joshua ascended from Gilgal, he and all the people who were with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have delivered them into your hand. Not a man of them shall stand before you. Joshua therefore came upon them suddenly, having marched all night from Gilgal. So the Lord routed them before Israel, killed them with a great slaughter at Gibeon, chased them all along the road that goes to Beth-horon, and struck them down as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And it happened as they fled before Israel and were on the descent to Beth-horon, that the Lord cast down large hailstones from heaven on them as far as Azekah, and they died. And there were more who died from the hailstones than the children of Israel killed with the sword. So the Lord tells them, you got to be people of your word, go defend them. But I'm using this as an opportunity for victory. And so he's gathered up all these enemies so that Joshua can defeat them all in one battle. That's pretty handy. In fact, it's not Joshua who does the battle, is it? We see that the Lord fights for Gibeon to defeat the Canaanites. He fights for his people. And I like kind of how the next section goes. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Hihalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there's been no day like that before it or after that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. But we see where the Lord even fought. He answered the prayer of Joshua. And so we see there were two miracles in this, in the Lord helping the Israelites. More were killed with hailstones than by the sword of the Israelites. And he even lengthened the day so that they would have more daylight to take care of this big battle. He answered prayer for Joshua. And so you see how the focus kind of shifted from Gibeon to this big battle, because it was bigger than just Gibeon. But the Lord used that as an opportunity to bring the enemies together so he could defeat them more effectively. But the story of Gibeon doesn't really end there. If you were to keep reading in Joshua, which we probably won't get through all of Joshua, but we're told what cities of the Levites were not going to have a territory, but they would be given cities scattered throughout. And one of the cities that they're given in Joshua chapter 21, they were given, where did it go? They were given Gibeon from the tribe of Benjamin. They're in verse 17. From the tribe of Benjamin, Gibeon with its common land was given to the Levites. But it's in a Canaanite city? Yeah, it is. But that's where these people are going to be living, who are going to be cutting wood and drawing water from their great big well they have in Gibeon in order to provide for the tabernacle. So let's just put the tabernacle close to there, and they'll be able to do this. And we find that in the days of Solomon, that's where the tabernacle is. Before the temple is built in Jerusalem, the tabernacle is in Gibeon. And that's where the Lord meets with him when Solomon asks for wisdom. We find that in the days of Nehemiah, the people of Gibeon, they come back. They were sent into exile, but they came back to continue working in the tabernacle, the new temple. And what's interesting is we don't know. Maybe it was Levites, but maybe it was Canaanites, because we find among those that came back, says there were Nethinim. They were people of Solomon, people of the land that Solomon had made to be servants of the tabernacle. He wasn't doing anything new. He was just confirming what Joshua had done centuries before. They so valued their servant's role to God through the tabernacle and then the temple that they continued to do it generation after generation after generation for centuries. And many opportunities not to. But I pray that we would be that way, generation after generation, treasuring the opportunity to serve the Lord, who has given us great mercy when we deserve to be destroyed for our sins and wickedness. But he rescued us and he preserves us. So I pray that we serve him. And part of doing that would be asking God for wisdom in all of our decisions, that we would be faithful to God. Funny how it all wraps together, isn't it? But I'm really glad that you joined me for this story. As we see, God works in mysterious ways. And we're thankful that God is pretty faithful to us, even when we make silly decisions. God bless, God keep you. Let's keep praying and serving together. See you next time.